All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling something that might surprise you.
Oh, yeah.
It's about how the stock market, Wall Street, can actually shape the competition, like the products and choices we see every day.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we're looking at this new research paper from the Management Science Journal.
Okay.
It's by Kini, Lee, and Shen. They're digging into this idea of common ownership,
Common ownership.
basically where like big investors have stakes in a bunch of different companies, even ones that, compete with each other.
Right. Okay.
So the big question is, does that kind of setup lead to less competition, like everyone playing it safe? Or could it actually make things more competitive?
Yeah, that's a good question.
The researchers have these two main ideas they're testing, two hypotheses.
Okay.
The first one is the market power hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of what you might expect.
Like, if an investor owns part of both Coke and Pepsi, they might not want them to go head-to-head too hard.
Exactly.
Keep things calm and, steady profits across the board.
Yeah, right. Why rock the boat if you own a piece of it? But then there's this other idea, the efficiency hypothesis.
Oh, interesting.
And this one's kind of counterintuitive. It says common owners might actually push for more competition.
More. How so?
Because they're thinking about something called knowledge spillover.
Knowledge spillover.
Yeah, it's like when one company figures something out, other companies they own can learn from that too.
Oh, I see.
So it benefits the owner to have all their companies pushing each other, kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Right. That makes sense. So, like, if a company owns a bunch of restaurants and one of them comes up with a killer new recipe.
Exactly. They could share that recipe with their other restaurants.
And everyone gets better as a result.
Just like, have you ever noticed how brands owned by the same companies sometimes roll out similar features?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like you see it all the time with tech companies.
Yeah, and that's what these researchers wanted to test. So to do that, they focused on these big mergers between financial institutions. Yeah, because when two of those giants combine, suddenly you have a ton of companies with common ownership.
Oh, right. It's like a sudden shift.
Exactly, like flipping a switch and seeing what happens to those companies, how they compete.
So did they find anything? Like, did common ownership actually make markets more competitive?
Well, they looked at something called product market fluidity.
Product market, what now?
Basically, it's a measure of how much companies are changing their products, adapting to what their rivals are doing. Like, think of how fast smartphones evolve.
Yeah, every year there's a new iPhone, new Samsung, everyone trying to outdo each other.
That's product market fluidity in action.
Okay, so did they find that common ownership made things more fluid?
They did. After those mergers, companies showed signs of stepping up their game, being more responsive to their competitors.
Wow, so it's like common ownership turned up the heat.
But there's a twist.
Oh.
This effect wasn't the same across every industry. It's more like common ownership can turn the volume up or down on competition, depending on what kind of industry we're talking about.
Okay, so what are some of those factors? What determines whether common ownership leads to, like, a cutthroat market or one where everyone's kind of chill?
Well, let's start with industry concentration. Imagine an industry with just a handful of really big players.
Okay.
Think of airlines.
Yeah, everyone knows who the big airlines are.
So even if they all came under common ownership, would they really need to shake things up?
Probably not. They're already making good money. Why risk a price war or, some big investment in something new?
It's like the quiet life scenario, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then what about industries where there are tons of players? Does common ownership make those more competitive?
That's what the research suggests.
Huh, interesting.
It kind of makes sense, right? If you've got a bunch of smaller companies in a really dynamic market, you benefit more if they're all pushing each other to be better.
Right, like constantly innovating and coming up with new stuff.
This is making me think differently about all the brands I see out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got industry concentration as one factor.
Yeah.
What else matters?
Another big one is technology proximity.
Technology proximity.
It's about how similar the tech is that different companies in an industry use.
Okay.
So in sectors where companies are all using similar tools and processes, those knowledge spillovers we talked about, they're even more powerful.
Oh, right.
It's like if one tech company figures out how to make their microchips more efficient, well, that knowledge could easily jump over to another tech company owned by the same investor.
And suddenly they're both racing to build faster, better products.
Exactly. And consumers like us benefit from all that innovation.
This is fascinating. So far, we've got industry concentration and technology proximity. What else should we be looking for to figure out how common ownership is shaping competition?
Well, We've talked about industry concentration, right, and technology proximity, but there's more to it.
There always is. What else should we be adding to our detective kit?
Okay, think about this. How easy or tough is it for brand new companies to, like, break into a market?
Ah, you're talking about those barriers to entry.
Exactly. We call them entry costs. And when those costs are high, common ownership is, well, it's more likely to kind of chill things out.
Makes sense. Like, if it takes a ton of money and time to even get started, those common owners might just stick with what they've got.
Right. Why shake things up when you're already comfy?
Don't rock the boat.
Exactly. Yep. But flip that around. When it's easy for new companies to jump in, those common owners, they might get a little more proactive.
They know they can't just sit back and relax.
Exactly. That fear of disruption, it can really push things forward.
Innovate or die. Right.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's one more piece of this puzzle. Consumer switching costs.
Switching costs.
It's all about how easy or how much of a pain it is for consumers, like you and me, to switch from one company to another.
Yeah. Like, if I can easily ditch my cell phone provider for a better deal, they gotta work harder to keep me happy.
You got it. In those kind of markets, common ownership, it often means more competition. Companies know they can't afford to get lazy.
But if switching is a nightmare, like with contracts and fees, well, then companies might get a little complacent, right?
That's often the case, yeah. In those scenarios, common ownership might lead to more of a take it or leave it vibe.
So the big takeaway here, it's not as simple as common ownership equals good or bad for competition.
Right. It's nuanced. It depends on a whole bunch of factors.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got these 4 clues we can look for, right? Industry concentration, technology proximity, entry costs, and consumer switching costs. By looking at all of them together, we can get a better sense of what's really going on.
Exactly. It's like our detective toolkit. Now let's try using those tools on some real-world industries.
Love it. Let's do it.
We've mentioned pharmaceuticals a couple times, right? High entry costs, developing new drugs takes forever.
Yeah, it's a tough business to crack.
But remember we said common ownership might actually be boosting innovation there?
Yeah, how does that work? I mean, high entry costs should mean less competition, right?
Well, despite that, pharmaceuticals is actually a pretty diverse industry. Lots of different companies working on a wide range of stuff. And because of all the science involved, there's a ton of overlap in the knowledge and tech they use.
So those knowledge spillovers we talked about, they're flowing freely.
Oh, yeah. Like if one company under common ownership figures out some breakthrough in, say, gene editing, that knowledge could help other companies working on gene therapies for different diseases. And the common owner, they've got an incentive to encourage that.
Because it could lead to more and better drugs.
Exactly. More innovation, potentially more profits down the line.
So common ownership might actually be speeding up the development of new treatments and cures.
It certainly can, but of course there's always the risk it could backfire.
How so?
Like, what if those companies start focusing on similar types of drugs, you know?
So less diversity in treatments overall.
Yeah, exactly. It's a delicate balance.
Makes you realize we got to keep a close eye on these industries, make sure things are working the way they should.
Absolutely. Now let's look at an industry where things might be a little different. The steel industry. Remember we talked about it earlier?
Yeah, a few big players, tough to break into, and the products are, well...
not exactly cutting edge, right?
Steel is steel. So are you saying this is one of those quiet life industries?
Well, it's got all the hallmarks, right? Highly concentrated, meaning a few big companies control most of the market. It's capital intensive, so you need tons of money just to get started.
And the products themselves aren't that different from each other.
Yeah, not a ton of innovation happening there. So the research suggests that in this kind of environment, common ownership might just reinforce the status quo.
So even if those steel giants are owned by the same investors, they're not really pushing each other to be better?
That's what the data suggests. They're already pretty comfy, and there's not a lot of pressure from new competition or, rapid tech advancements.
So common ownership, it's not a simple good guy or bad guy story.
Exactly.
Its impact really depends on the specific context.
You got it.
We got to look at the whole picture. Now, let's talk about what this all means for us, the consumers. How can we use this knowledge to make smarter decisions?
Okay, so we've been analyzing industries, playing detective. But how do we actually apply this in our everyday lives?
Right. That's the key question.
Well, it starts with being aware, Yeah.
Like
next time you're shopping for something, take a second to think about the companies involved.
Okay.
Do they seem to be offering, a lot of choices? Are they innovating? Or does it feel like they're all kind of offering the same thing, same prices?
So we're looking for signs of that quiet life, right?
Exactly. If a market feels kind of stagnant, common ownership might be part of the reason.
Makes sense.
And if you really want to dig deep, you can look online. There are websites that track which companies are owned by the same big investors.
Oh, cool. It's like peeling back the curtain to see who's really in control.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing is only half the battle, right?
Yeah, what can we actually do with this information?
Well, one thing is to, vote with your wallet. If you see a company that's innovating, offering good value, support them.
So if we want more competition, we got to reward the companies that are already doing it right.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if you're frustrated with the lack of choices, high prices, you can take your business elsewhere, or at least make your voice heard.
Right, let those companies know you're not happy.
Exactly.
So it's not just about being informed, it's about using that info to make a difference.
Right. Another thing we can do is advocate for policies that promote competition.
So like supporting regulations that prevent too much concentration of ownership.
Exactly. We can contact our elected officials, support organizations that fight for consumer rights, even just talk to our friends and family about these issues.
It's like raising awareness is the first step.
Definitely.
Wow, this has been eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on how business works.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, this is just the start, There's always more to learn.
For sure. Well, we've covered a lot today, from those big abstract ideas about common ownership all the way to how it affects us every day.
Yeah, we talked about those 4 key clues to look for.
Industry concentration, technology proximity, entry costs, and consumer switching costs.
Yep. And how we can use that knowledge to be smarter consumers and, advocate for a better system.
This has been a fantastic deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And for all you listeners out there, keep those deep dives going. We'll see you next time.